He saw her across the ballroom on another man's arm, and only then, too late, God help him, years too late, did the Duke of Fernley understand what he had thrown away. Alexander Vane, Duke of Fernley, had come to the Wexford ball a married man and a wretched one, and he had told himself the wretchedness was merely the ordinary settling of a marriage into its dull middle country. He had told himself this for the better part of a year. It had taken exactly one glimpse Rosalind Carey, in pale green silk, laughing up at Lord Ashworth with a warmth Alexander had never once in his life managed to draw from her, for the whole comfortable lie to collapse, and for the truth to rise up in its place with the force of a blow. That he had loved her, quietly, for years and never seen it, and that he had married the wrong woman. He stood very still against a marble pillar and watched Rosalind Carey dance, and remembered, with a clarity that was its own punishment, all the things he had failed to notice at the time. Rosalind had been the quiet one. That was the whole of it, really, the whole of his blindness. When Alexander had first come courting into that circle 2 years past, there had been 2 young women, dearest friends since the schoolroom. Beatrice Sinclair, who was golden and dazzling and quick, who filled a room the moment she entered it, and Rosalind Carey, who was dark and still and watchful, who stood a little back, who spoke less and saw more. Everyone had looked at Beatrice. Alexander had looked at Beatrice. It was the easiest thing in the world to look at Beatrice. And Rosalind, he understood it now, watching her laugh with Ashworth, he understood it with a sick lurch of the heart. Rosalind had loved him. Silently. From the first. He could see it now in 100 remembered moments he had been too dazzled to read at the time. The way she had always known, without being told, when he was low, and steered the conversation gently to what would ease him. The book she had lent him that he had never returned, annotated in her small hand with the very passages he most needed. The single dance she had granted him at the Melbury rout, when she had looked up at him with her whole grave heart in her dark eyes, and he had spent the entire dance talking of Beatrice, and had felt her go quiet in his arms, and had thought nothing of it. She had loved him, and had never said a word because she was the quiet one, and because her dearest friend loved him too, and Rosalind Carey was not a woman who would ever put herself before someone she loved. She had stepped back. She had watched him court Beatrice and had helped it along, even a kind word here, an arranged meeting there, schooling her own face to gladness while her heart broke, because Beatrice's happiness mattered more to her than her own. And Alexander, seeing only the dazzle, had married the golden friend and never once suspected that the quiet one at the edge of every gathering had been the one who understood him, the one who suited him, the one his soul had been reaching for all along. He had married Beatrice a year ago, and it had been from the first a quiet catastrophe. Not a cruel one. That was the strange thing, the thing that made it so difficult to explain and so impossible to escape. Beatrice was not unkind. Alexander was not unkind. They had simply discovered, within a month of the wedding, that the dazzle which drew every eye across a ballroom was no foundation whatever for a life, that they had almost nothing to say to one another over a breakfast table, that the very qualities that made Beatrice magnificent in company made her restless and unhappy in the quiet of a marriage, and that the reserve which made Alexander formidable in the world made him a stranger in his own drawing-room. They had been, both of them, in love with an idea. The ideas had married. The people had not and could not, and both of them had known it, with a growing and unspoken desperation, long before this night. But he had not let himself know the rest of it, the name of the thing he actually wanted, until he saw Rosalind Carey on Lord Ashworth's arm, being courted, being won, slipping away into a future that had another man in it, and felt the ground open under his feet. He had not always been blind. That was the cruelest part of it, the part he turned over and over in the sleepless weeks that followed. There had been moments, he could count them now, like a miser counting a lost fortune, when the truth had brushed against him, and he had waved it off as one waves off a moth. There had been the winter his father died 3 years ago, when Alexander had gone about the world encased in a grief he permitted no one to see, formidable and cold and utterly alone. Beatrice in those weeks had been all sparkling sympathy and had wearied of it quickly, for sorrow was not a thing she knew what to do with. It did not sparkle back. But Rosalind had simply appeared, again and again, quietly at the edges of his days. She had not offered condolences. She had talked to him of ordinary things, of books and horses and the absurdities of their acquaintance, giving him an hour's respite from the wait, asking nothing, and had gone away again before he could feel he owed her anything. He had thought dimly at the time what a restful sort of girl Miss Carey was. He had not understood that she was the only person in England who had troubled to learn what he actually needed, and had given it to him without being asked, and without hope of thanks. He had thought her restful. She had been, he saw now, saving his sanity and loving him and expecting nothing all at once. There had been the book, a slim volume of poems she had lent him that same winter, saying only that she thought he might find something in it. He had read it. One did not refuse Miss Carey, who asked for so little and had found, marked faintly in pencil in her small neat hand, the very verses that spoke to a man drowning in a grief he could not name aloud. She had not told him she had marked them. She had let him find them as if by accident, so that the comfort should seem to come from the poet and not from her, so that he need feel no awkward obligation. He had never returned the book. It sat still on his shelf, and in the sleepless weeks after the Wexford ball he took it down and found the pencil marks again and understood at last what they were. A love letter, written in another man's words that he had been too dazzled to read. And there had been the dance. The single dance at the Melbury Rout, the only time in 3 years he had ever held Rosalind Carey in his arms, and he had spent the whole of it talking of Beatrice. How lovely she had looked that evening, whether Rosalind thought she favored him, what he ought to say to win her, and he had felt his partner grow gradually still and quiet against his hand, and had thought, vaguely, that Miss Carey must be tired, and had not once looked down into her face to see what was written there. He looked now in memory and saw it plainly, a woman holding her whole broken heart very carefully still, so that the man she loved should not see it and be embarrassed, so that she might see her friend made happy at the cost of her own silence. He had asked her at the end of that dance whether she thought Beatrice would have him. And Rosalind Carey had looked up at him with her grave dark eyes and said steadily, "I think any woman would be fortunate to be chosen by you, your Grace." And he had gone away pleased, and never heard the thing beneath the words, the small mortal wound of a woman wishing herself the woman chosen. He had been, he understood now, a fool of a very particular and unforgivable kind, not a cruel man but a blind one which in its consequences was no better. Cruelty at least sees its victim. Blindness does not even grant that dignity. He had walked past the truest heart he would ever meet for 3 full years, and married the wrong woman, and made 3 people wretched, himself and Beatrice, and most of all the quiet one at the edge of the room who had asked for nothing and been given exactly that. He did not act on it that night. Whatever else the Duke of Fernley was, he was not a scoundrel, and a married man does not cross a ballroom to a woman he has belatedly realized he loves. He was married. That was the wall, and it was a wall of his own building, and he had no right to wish it away merely because he had discovered, too late, what stood on the other side of it. So he went home to Beatrice, and he did a braver and a harder thing than crossing any ballroom. He told her the truth. He found her in her sitting room, still in her ball gown, and she looked up at him with the particular guarded weariness that had become the whole weather of their marriage, and Alexander sat down across from her and said, "Beatrice, I think we must speak honestly at last about what we have both known for a long while and neither of us has been willing to say." And to his enduring surprise, his wife, his golden, dazzling, restless wife, who had never once wept in front of him, put her face in her hands and wept and said, "Oh, thank God! Thank God you have said it. I have not known how." They talked that night, more truly than they had in the whole year of their marriage. It came out, all of it, in the strange free rush of 2 people finally telling the truth, that Beatrice had married him half for love and half for the coronet and the triumph of the match, and had known within the month that she had made a terrible mistake, that she was miserable in the great silent house, starved for the life and gaiety she had been born for. That there was, she confessed it in a whisper, twisting her handkerchief, a man, a poor younger son named Captain Hale, whom she had known before ever Alexander came courting, whom she had loved and given up as unsuitable, and who wrote to her still chastely, achingly, and whom she thought of every day. She had been faithful. She swore it, and Alexander believed her, for whatever else lay between them there had never been dishonesty of that kind. But she was withering, she said, and so was he, and they were two young people chained in a marriage that was slowly killing the best in both of them, for the sake of an idea that had proven false before the wedding flowers had wilted. "And I have seen you tonight," Beatrice said, wiping her eyes, and there was in her voice now something almost gentle, the first real kindness to pass between them in a year. "I saw your face when Rosalind Carey came into the room. I have known you a year, Alexander, and I have never seen your face do that, not once, not for me." She gave a broken little laugh. "It is Rosalind. Of course it is Rosalind. It was always going to be Rosalind if either of us had had the sense to see it. She is exactly what you need, and I am exactly what you do not. And God forgive me, I stood between you, though I never meant to, because I was too dazzled by my own reflection in your coronet to notice that my dearest friend had gone quiet and gray the season you began to court me." Alexander sat very still. "You knew," he said, "you knew she loved me." "I know it now," Beatrice said. "I did not let myself know it then. It was too convenient not to know." She looked at him, and her lovely face was wet and honest, and for the first time truly his friend. "We have made a mess of things, you and I, out of vanity and blindness, and there are two other people in the world tonight, Rosalind and my poor Captain Hale, who have paid for our folly with years of quiet unhappiness. I do not think we can undo it by continuing to be miserable in each other's company. I think the only honest thing left to us is to set one another free, cleanly, and try to repair what we can of the damage we have done." It was not a simple thing she proposed. A duke did not put aside a duchess without the whole of society falling upon the scandal like crows. But Alexander Vane had a cold, clear head when it was not clouded by dazzle, and a great deal of money, and it emerged over the following weeks of careful, discreet consultation with lawyers and bishops. A marriage that offered a quiet and honorable door of escape, for it had, in truth and in a way neither of them had ever spoken of, never truly been a marriage at all. They had lived this whole strange, wretched year as strangers under one roof. The union had never been made whole in the way that binds two people past undoing. There were grounds, the lawyers said gravely, and precedent, and with discretion and goodwill on both sides the thing could be dissolved cleanly, the marriage annulled as never truly consummated, both parties free, no dishonor cast on either, a rare mercy, but a real one for two people brave enough to tell the truth. They took it, quietly, over a matter of months, with no public brawling and no whisper of infidelity, for there had been none. The Duke of Fernley and his Duchess parted as they should have remained, friends and nothing more. Beatrice Freed married her Captain Hale within the year, a love match at last, and glowed at her second wedding as she had never glowed at her first. And Alexander stood as a guest at the back of the church and was glad for her with a wholeness that told him, more than anything, how right the parting had been. But that lay ahead. First there was the far harder matter of Rosalind Carey, who did not know any of it, and who was still, as far as the world could see, being courted by Lord Ashworth, and who had every reason on earth to despise the Duke of Fernley, and none at all to forgive him. The months of the annulment were the strangest of Alexander's life, a slow, careful, honorable dismantling of a mistake, conducted in low voices behind closed doors, with lawyers who chose their words like men crossing ice, and a sympathetic old bishop who had known Alexander's father, and who listened to the whole sad truth of the marriage with a grave and not unkind attention. It would have been easier, certainly, and quieter to do the dishonorable thing instead, to remain married in name, to keep Beatrice as an ornament, and to seek his happiness elsewhere in the discreet, sordid way that half the great houses of England managed such matters. No one would have blinked. It was the ordinary hypocrisy of his world. But Alexander found he could not do it, and neither could Beatrice, and the reason was the same for both of them, and it surprised them both. They had, in the wreck of their marriage, become at last honest with one another, and having tasted honesty after a year of pretense, neither could stomach a lifetime of the lie. Better a clean and painful truth, they agreed, than a comfortable and rotting deception. Better to be free and blameless than bound and false. So they were careful. There was never, from first to last, a single word of scandal that could touch either of them, because there was no scandal, only two young people who had married in error and were brave enough to admit it, and part before the error hardened into ruin. Beatrice bore herself throughout with a grace Alexander had not known she possessed. Freed from the coronet she had half married him for, she became, curiously, more herself and more likable than she had ever been as his duchess. And Alexander, for his part, insisted on terms of the most scrupulous generosity. Beatrice left the marriage with her own fortune untouched, and a settlement besides, so that no one could ever say the Duke of Fernley had cast off a wife and left her the poorer. "You were not the wrong woman, Beatrice," he told her at the last when the papers were signed and she was free. "We were the wrong pairing. That is a different thing, and the fault of it is at least half mine, and I will not have you leave this thinking yourself discarded. You were dazzling. You will dazzle some far luckier man than I, and he will be the man for it, as I never was." She had wept at that and kissed his cheek sisterly and said, "Go and find Rosalind, you great fool, but wait, do you hear me? Wait until it is all clean and done. She has been second best long enough. Do not go to her with the ink still wet. Go to her free and clear so that there can never be a whisper against her, so that she never has to wonder whether she was your escape rather than your choice. She deserves that. Give her that." It was the wisest thing anyone had said to him in 3 years, and it came, of all people, from the wife he was in the very act of parting from, and Alexander took it to heart, and waited, though the waiting near killed him, through the last of the legal winter, through Beatrice's own bright remarriage in the spring, through week after week of knowing Rosalind was being courted by another man and holding himself back from the door. He waited until it was clean. And in the waiting, he came at last to understand the difference between the two kinds of love he had known, the one that had drawn every eye to Beatrice across a ballroom, quick and bright and gone like a struck match, and the other, slow and deep and unregarded, that had been quietly warming him for years while he looked the wrong way. He had chased the match. He meant now to spend the rest of his life tending the fire. He did not go to her the moment he was free. He had learned, at last, the cost of moving too fast toward the wrong thing, and he was determined not to compound it by moving too fast toward the right one. He let the annulment be quietly finished. He let Beatrice's remarriage settle the gossip. He waited until the thing was clean and done and could bring no shadow on Rosalind's name. And only then, on a bright cold morning in the following spring, did the Duke of Fernley call at the Carey house and ask, hat in hand like the humblest of men, whether Miss Rosalind Carey would receive him. She received him in the small morning room, standing, not sitting, which told him at once how it was to be. She was as he remembered, and as he had spent a year failing to forget, dark, still, watchful, her grave eyes giving nothing away. "Your Grace," she said, "this is unexpected." Miss Carey. He had rehearsed a great many careful speeches on the way, and forgotten every one of them the moment he saw her face. "I have come to say something to you that I ought to have understood 3 years ago, and that I have no right to say now, and that I am going to say regardless, because I have learned what silence costs, and I will not be a coward about this too." Something flickered in her stillness. "I think, Your Grace, you had better not." "You loved me," Alexander said. "Once, before I married. You loved me, and you never said a word, because Beatrice loved me too, and because you would sooner have died than take anything from a friend, and so you stepped back and helped me court her and watched me marry her. And I was so dazzled I never saw you at all. I looked straight past the one person in that whole bright circle who understood me, who suited me, whose company was the only company I was ever wholly easy in, and I married the dazzle, and I have paid for it every day since, and so, I think, have you." His voice was not steady now. "I saw you at the Wexford ball on Ashworth's arm, laughing, and I understood in one moment the whole of what I had thrown away. I am not married any longer, Rosalind. The union is dissolved cleanly, honestly, with no dishonor to anyone. Beatrice and I were never truly wed in anything but name, and we have both admitted it and been set free, and she has married the man she should have had all along and is happy. I waited until it was all clean and done before I came to you, so that no breath of it could ever touch you. And now I am free, and I have come to tell you the truth I was too blind to know 3 years ago. I love you. I have loved you, I think, since before I knew your Christian name, and I have come to ask whether it is, by any mercy, not entirely too late." Rosalind Carey was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was low and controlled, and it cut him to the bone. "Do you know what it is," she said, "to love someone silently for years, to school your face at their wedding, To be the friend, the quiet one, the one no one looks at, while the man you love dances with your dearest friend and speaks to you only of her. I do. I have done it. I did it for 3 years, Your Grace, and it very nearly hollowed me out, and I have spent this last year, this whole hard year while you were married, teaching myself, at last, not to. Teaching myself that I was worth being chosen first by someone, instead of settled for. Lord Ashworth is a good man. He looked at me across a room and saw me, the first time, with no one else to compare me to. He chose me first. Do you understand what that is worth to a woman who spent 3 years being no one's first choice? I understand, Alexander said very low, that I do not deserve you. I have never for one moment thought I did. I am not here because I deserve you. I am here because I love you and because you deserve to know it, even if you send me away, even if you should marry Ashworth tomorrow. You deserve to know that there is a man in the world who saw, too late, exactly what you were, and has never stopped being sorry that he saw it too late. He drew a breath. I will not press you. I will not compete with Ashworth for your hand like two men bidding on a horse. You have been treated as second best quite enough, and I will not do it to you again. I have said what I came to say. If your answer is no, if you have given your heart to a man who was wise enough to see you first, then I will wish you every joy and mean it, and never trouble you again. I only could not let another day pass in silence. I have done enough damage with my silence. He turned to go. Alexander, his name in her voice stopped him at the door. He had never heard her use it before. He turned. Rosalind Carey was no longer standing quite so still. There was something working in her face now, some hard thing breaking, and her dark eyes had filled. Lord Ashworth has not asked me, she said. He has courted me all winter, and he is a good man, and I have let him because I thought perhaps if I let a good man who chose me first court me long enough, I would stop feeling what I have never once stopped feeling for a blind fool of a duke who married my friend. A tear spilled over. It has not worked. It has not worked for one single day. I sat at your Beatrice's second wedding, watching her marry her captain, and I heard the whispers that the Duke of Fernley was free, and I hated you. Alexander, I hated you for coming free, because it undid a whole year of teaching my heart to let you go in the space of an afternoon. And I have been terrified ever since that you would come. And here you are. She pressed her hand to her mouth. You great, blind, stupid, beloved fool. You looked past me for 3 years. Do you have the smallest idea how frightened I am to be looked at now? Alexander crossed the room. He did not touch her. He had learned that at least from a whole year of learning things too late, but he stood close, and he looked at her, truly looked at her, in a way he never once had in all the years he had known her, at the whole grave, watchful, loving heart of her, and he let her see that he was, at last, seeing it. I am not asking you to be looked at, Rosalind, he said. I am asking you to be chosen, first, above every other soul on this earth, for the whole of my life, with no dazzle to distract me and no comparison to be made, because there is no comparison, there never was, I was only too foolish to know it. I choose you, not as second best, not as a thing settled for, as the first and only and truest choice of my heart, made freely, made late, but made now with my whole self. Will you have me, though I do not deserve you? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that the man who once looked past you will never, so long as he lives, look anywhere else again? Rosalind Carey looked up at him, and the last of her guard, 3 years and more in the building, came down all at once. Yes, she whispered, God help us both, yes. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the single dance at the Melbury Rout when he had talked of another woman and felt her go quiet in his arms. This time he was wholly present, and so was she, and there was no one in the world he was thinking of but the woman he held, and Rosalind Carey, who had loved in silence for 3 years and taught herself to stop and failed, wept and laughed against his mouth and held on. Lord Ashworth, when he was told, took it with more grace than Alexander had any right to expect, and married a cheerful heiress the next season, and bore the Duke no lasting grudge, being at heart a sensible man who could see that Rosalind's whole face changed when Fernley entered a room, and had, if he were honest, seen it all winter. They were married that summer quietly without dazzle, which suited them both. Beatrice came with her captain, and she and Rosalind, friends since the schoolroom, parted for a while by the folly of a blind man. Mendied now wept in each other's arms before the ceremony and laughed all through the breakfast. And Alexander watched the two women who had shaped his whole heart's education embrace, and understood how nearly his own stupidity had cost him everything, and how great a mercy it was that the truth, told at last by three brave people who refused to keep living a lie, had set all of them free. In the years that followed, those who had known the Duke of Fernley in his cold and dazzled youth marveled at the change in him. He had been formidable once, a man who filled a room with his reserve and let no one near. Now, though the reserve remained for the world at large, it fell away entirely in the presence of his wife, and those admitted to their fireside found a man transformed attentive, quick to laughter, forever turning to Rosalind to share a glance or finish a thought, the two of them speaking half in words and half in the private shorthand of people who have at last found the one soul that fits their own. He kept her father's little book of poems on the table by his chair to the end of his days, the pencil marks worn soft with handling, and when their children were old enough he taught them from it, and told them, without ever quite explaining why, that the truest things in life are often written faintly, in the margins, by the people too modest to sign their names, and that a wise heart learns to read them before it is too late. He had come to his happiness late and by a hard and humbling road, and he never once forgot it, and that was perhaps the secret of how well he kept it. A man who has been given a treasure guards it carelessly. A man who has nearly thrown one away guards it with his life. He spent the rest of his life keeping his promise. He never again looked past Rosalind Vane at anything or anyone. He had learned in the hardest school the price of the quiet heart overlooked, and he paid attention now, fiercely, joyfully, to the still watchful, loving woman he had so nearly lost, noticing her, choosing her, telling her, every single day in 10,000 small ways, the thing he had failed for 3 years to see and would never again forget. That the one who stands quietly at the edge of the room, watching, understanding, loving without a word, is very often the one worth the whole of the dazzle and more, and that a wise man, though he come to it late, learns at last to look not for the brightest face in the crowd, but for the truest, and having found it, never lets it go.